Good evening, dear participants, near and far. I know that there are participants from very near, here in the building of H401 in Amsterdam, from where I'm speaking at the moment. My name is Lars Ebert. I coordinate the Heritage Contact Zone project and I work at H401 here in Amsterdam. And I know that there are participants from very far. We have run a project that comes to an end this week in which 7 partners from 7 European countries were involved. But this project has also collaborated with others, and I've seen already that also our friends from the SPEME project are present. So we have listeners even from very different time zones in Latin America, for instance. So welcome to all of you as well to this night's lecture by Andrea Peto, Shame and the Memory Politics of Illiberal States. This evening takes place in a whole series of events that we have called the Week of Contested Heritage, which brings to an end a 2-year-long project called Heritage Contact Zone. Now, I hope that many of you are aware of the project, but it may very well be that some of you have never heard about it, which doesn't matter at all, because tonight we will discuss Andrea Peto's piece. But if you have a look at our website, which will come up in the chat in a second, heritagecontactzone.org, you will understand why the contribution of Andrea is so central for our project and is a very nice trigger for a discussion at the end of it. In a nutshell, Heritage Contact Zone is a EU-funded project within the Creative Europe program that had a special call for the 2018 year of cultural heritage. The European Union has labeled 2018 the year of cultural heritage and has financed 25 projects across Europe that could work on different notions of heritage. Now, we have brought together 7 partners. The organization I represent, H401 in Amsterdam, has taken the lead together with the Goethe Institute, with whom we collaborate for many years. But we also have partners from Greece, from Hungary, from Romania, from Italy, from Belgium. I hope I don't forget anyone. 7 partners. Look them up on the website. They all represent small or medium-sized cultural heritage organizations, often dealing with marginalized heritage or with some conflict potential in the heritage they represent. And one network, Culture Action Europe in Brussels, and the university, the European University Institute in Florence. During the 2 years, we have realized 5 exhibitions across Europe in which we've worked with citizens that brought objects and told stories of objects that were neglected. And we have co-curated exhibitions that told new and unexpected stories. We have run a lot of workshops in which dialogue was very central. Dialogue about heritage about which we disagree, and where we thought, well, this disagreement is fruitful. It's not something to necessarily quickly overcome, but to hold the tension in order to really work through painful aspects of heritage. And we've concluded with publishing a toolkit that we've co-written together. We will present that tomorrow in a session at 2 o'clock in this very same channel here. And we've written a policy paper in which we ask policymakers to think differently about how they fund cultural projects in the future, with much more attention to participation and bottom-up processes. We will launch that paper also tomorrow at 3 o'clock with someone from the European Commission, with someone from the European Parliament, and with a representative from a national ministry to discuss with them why heritage is potentially fruitful for our activities in the future, but also so difficult, and how they see that we can support it differently in the future. Here in the exhibition space of H401, we show at the moment an exhibition called Shame, Exploring Masculinity. And shame is, of course, an emotion that often comes with thinking about who we are, and who we are often comes with a history that we have, with memories that we adopt, with a community in which we are embedded, and that often comes with a struggle. So this exhibition is very much suitable also for the Heritage Contact Zone project. And I take the moment to also show the book that we've done with it, Shame and Masculinities at Valise, where also Andrea has a contribution in it about which we are really happy. Tonight, Andrea's contribution will be in many more respects very suitable, because today is also the United Nations Day, International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So in this exhibition, with the contribution of Andrea, we will pay tribute to that as well. Andrea Peto is probably well known to many of you. Andrea Peto is a kind of public intellectual and academic also that comes out of the ivory tower more than she goes back into it, which is fantastic, and which is why we probably like to collaborate also, because she makes very complex issues accessible for a broad audience, and she is not shy of taking the stage and being controversial as well. Andrea is a historian and a professor at the Department of Gender Studies at the Central European University in Budapest, which is at the moment exiled in Vienna, in itself a conflictual situation with a lot of potential for dialogue. And she's a Doctor of Science of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences as well. And her work on gender, politics, Holocaust, and war has been translated into 23 languages. And it is an endless list of books and publications that I'm not going into right now, but you can all find that on the internet, of course. She has won various prizes, and of course, due to the situation at the moment, lives between Budapest and Vienna. I believe tonight she's talking to us from Budapest. And in that sense, she crosses borders a lot, but not only in her geographical existence, but also in her work. She crosses a lot of discipline borders all the time, and she engages, and this is what really is for me what I admire a lot. She engages with practitioners, activists, artists, with civil society initiatives and in NGOs and projects like this one. I think you've visited this place here many years ago when we met on the recommendation of Friends of Gender Study in Utrecht. And last time we met was in Istanbul at a conference of the Hrant Dink Foundation. And I mentioned this not because it was nice that we met and talked together, but because the Hrant Dink Foundation is one of the examples that we published in our toolkit, as well as a case study. Because Hrant Dink, the Armenian journalist that was shot in front of his apartment in Istanbul, his apartment has been turned into a place in which there is not a historic story being told, but a place for people to meet and discuss the very difficult heritage that he represents, not to tell the one story, but to stand the ambiguity also of difficult heritage. So in that sense, I'm really happy that we can continue this ongoing conversation tonight, Andrea. And without further ado, I will give you the word, and you have agreed after your lecture to stay with us for a while and answer questions of the project partners and have a little conversation that we are trying to wrap up in an hour, the latest, so that we can get off our screens, all of us, and enjoy an offline evening after that. But now, first of all, feed us with your text, Andrea. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Lars, for this generous introduction. It is always a pleasure to see you and to create a dialogue. I really appreciate the work what you are doing and your colleagues are doing, and this project is really exemplary in our extremely troubled world. So what I will be doing today is trying to share my screen first, and then my text is on the on my, wait, I pushed the wrong button, and on my okay, it's here. So I'm really grateful that you are spending this beautiful autumn evening with me. I will talk partly based on this wonderful book. I don't think I ever been published in a more beautiful book like this, but I will be mostly focusing on the memory of shame and sexual violence, especially because of this today's special day. And this is basically the structure of the talk. First, I will be talking about the changing dynamics of the concept of shame and the Second World War. And I don't need to emphasize how important the memory of the Second World War is today in this particular geopolitical context. Then I speak a little bit about the return of the victim and what are the consequences. Then I offer a new theoretical framework, and which is the polypore state. Before you start Googling what polypore is, this is this mushroom which lives on the trunk of the tree and producing nothing else than the polypore. And this is followed by a counter strategy, because I thought it would be really interesting to give you a good example about where I'm actually have the privilege to participate, and talk a little bit about visual narratives of the sexual violence during the Second World War, and to give you some conclusions. I wrote this up, so it will be approximately like 30 minutes. I have got some slides also to show you. I try to be, very slow and very kind of didactic, because, I find this pretty important to be able, that you would able to follow. So, unashamed citizens have been a major force behind progressive movements and revolutions. By ignoring and challenging the economy of emotions, different social groups have successfully challenged value systems that were previously seen as unchangeable. Unashamed citizens are not simply trying to overcome their own shame and live in a perfect ideal state where no one ever has a bad feeling or negative emotions about themselves. This fantasy is tied to a highly individualistic account of moral agency as a lever for changing collective social dynamics. This social dynamics, however, is not static. This is actually will be an important point. Not individualistic, and can change collective social dynamics towards exclusionary practices, not only to inclusionary practices. What is cool can shift and alter from context to context. In this talk, I will analyze how illiberal memory politics uses the concept of shame in creating new political citizenship by mapping how shame is narrated in relation to sexual violence during the Second World War. And I will explore how shame is transformed in the new memory politics of illiberal states as a positive effect, and how it is used as a mobilizational force. And at the end, I will give you another strategy. So the first section about the Second World War and shame. I have been working on the history of sexual violence during the Second World War since the late 1990s. When I started to put together my citation list for a university report, I was astonished to see that an article I wrote on rapes committed by the Red Army in Hungary around 1944-45 was my most cited article by far, both the original Hungarian as well as its translations to German and English. It was especially stunning that most of the quotes of this article on sexual violence were in journals of history and not of gender studies. With this feminist memory work unsilencing a particular case of sexual violence faced by Hungarian women during the Second World War, I had become one of the most quoted historians by conservative and right-wing academics and journalists, especially during the months of February, which marks Budapest liberation in 1945, and in the months of April, when the war in Hungary ended in 1945. How come? In post-1989 Eastern Europe, there is a diverse market, academic and political, for stories of brutality by the Red Army. The increasing circulation of stories of women who saw or heard other women being raped have been contributed to the formation of national martyrdom. However, some of the women who had experienced sexual violence, such as Jewish women who were greeting the Red Army as liberators and were also raped, continued to remain in silence, sometimes in order not to participate in the invalidation of the Red Army's role in ending of the war. Silence for them was a form of resistance to the existing dominant politics of memory, which uncritically glorified the Red Army. But it was also a resistance to this illiberal memory term I will be talking about. Their story also underlines that sometimes there are uneasy coalitions behind new memory work. This type of memory work was initiated by this illiberal turn. To my surprise, in 2012, I was invited by a well-known pro-government conservative journalist, Fružina Škrabski, to give an interview for the film she was making about the rapes committed by the Red Army soldiers. The title of her project, and later the title of her film, was Silenced Shame. I immediately protested against this title. Whose shame are we talking about? The women's shames, the perpetrator shames, the relative shames, the collective shame. And who silenced it? No matter that it is a judgment against the self, shame is not only an individualistic category. It is a feeling that one is perceived as inadequate or unlovable from the imagined viewpoint of the imagined others. The phrase facing shame exposes the relationality inherent in the concept of shame. On the one hand, it implies confronting reality or a dimension about one's life or history that requires a change in the level of awareness about an already present reality. On the other hand, it also implies that shame is more easily recognized and encountered for what it is when a face can be put on it. I'm quoting Jasper, guilt is about what I have done, shame about who am I. End quote. I was very much concerned about how the title of the film would contribute to the discourse about sexual violence committed by the Red Army soldiers in Hungary. Apart from my article in Historical Journal, not much was published about these events. The mass sexual violence committed by Red Army soldiers was tabooized as soon as the war ended. From 1945 onwards, the Hungarian Communist Party commenced its ideological battle and has spoken neither about the Red Army sexual violence nor about other atrocities committed by the Soviets. According to the then produced public means, the Soviet army brought along nothing but peace. They never engaged in violent acts against civilians. Presently, the facing of the shame felt over the sexual violence committed by the Red Army soldiers are supported by the present government's ideology. However, the fight against shame can easily become a form of blaming. The new government-supported discourse exactly blames the so-called Russians representing the Red Army for the crimes they committed. In doing so, they ethnicized the rape, supporting Hungarian victimhood in the Second World War. The theoretical frame of different Eastern European national memory strategies, which are founded on national victimhood, varies. Countries that were occupied by both the Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union blame these two countries for all the traumas of the 20th century. Connerton calls this process repressive erasure, a memory frame based on the exclusion of unpleasant elements of the past. The Hungarian state's current memory discourse is built on this double erasure, the double occupation framework, which is this double victimization. According to this discourse, Hungary was occupied by the Germans and the Soviets, as represented by the monuments of German occupation in Budapest on Liberty Square, which was erected during the night because of public protests. The plague, which equalizes the victims regardless whether they were Jews or Hungarian perpetrators, prompted a counter movement. And I'm so happy that this living memorial is a partner in this project, what Lars was mentioning. The monument of German occupation was erected in 2014 as a clear sign that the government had started a new phase in memory politics. The film Silence, Shame also gained relevance in the framework of the memory politics of the Hungarian illiberal regime, as it presented Hungarian women as victims of the Soviet occupation, because this turned out to be the most successful intervention in memory politics. By now, every secondary school in Hungary has received a free DVD copy, and Hungarian public television has broadcasted this film several times. On YouTube, the film has got some 100,000 views, and you can find the subtitled version, the English and also the Russian version. In this paper, I'm focusing on these rapes committed by the Red Army soldiers. I examine how shame is used by illiberal states. I argue that there has been a shift in the dynamics of remembrance of illiberal memory politics, the redefinition of shame as a part of emotional politics. So what is this new context when it is happening? After 1989, along with the revision of progressive political traditions, anti-communism, fueled by the memory of the persecution that took place during the Soviet occupation, became the foundation of the emerging political discourses within the former Eastern Bloc countries. Meanwhile, the various states have concealed how deeply they were historically involved in the Nazi and the communist system in order to prove that they were merely victims. The changing frameworks of memory politics is causing theoretical and methodological difficulties in studying rapes committed during the Second World War. Using a metaphor borrowed from the natural sciences, Charles Mayer discussed cold and hot memories of Nazism and communism. Until 1989, the memory of Nazism was hot memory in Hungary. In other words, it was the most important framework of historiography constructed and sustained by institutionalized memory politics. Nationwide commemorations on the day of the country's liberation, wreath laying at Soviet monuments and tombs of the soldiers, and so on. Later, the changing frameworks of memory politics placed other experiences and events in the center field of remembrance. After 1989, the emergence of museums, movies, and commemorations reminiscing the terrors of communism started to suggest that the history of communism had priority, that it had become the past that has yet be talked about. Simultaneously, the memory of Nazism became a cold memory, or the memory that belonged to the past that allegedly had no effect on the present. Therefore, while the rapes committed by Soviet soldiers were a taboo topic until 1989, after 1989, they became an issue to be examined, a part of the hot memory. The Gulag and the rapes committed by Red Army soldiers were missing from the official history and collective memory before 1989, but they were a part of private and family histories as long as the Red Army was stationing in Hungary until 1991. It was the burden of the survivors to narrate, preserve, and transmit stories of this event. Oral testimonies and oral history project is the modern form of preserved communication. These stories were finally narrated after 1989, but the way they were narrated has been linked to the emergence of the unashamed citizen. Since the recent Eastern paradigm shift in Hungarian foreign politics, Russia again plays a key role as an ally. Therefore, these events are again not memorialized and possibly not talked about. For example, silent shame was not screened at the event organized by Angelina Jolie in London to draw attention to the victims of wartime sexual violence, because the Hungarian government withdrew their support for the screening. The difficulties are connected to the phenomenon that Jan van Zina calls floating gap. And I'm quoting his definition. There is a gap between the informal generational memory, referring to the recent past, and the formal cultural memory, which refers to the remote past. And since this gap shifts with the succession of generations, that's why it's called floating gap, which illustrates the difference between social and cultural frames of memory, or communicative and cultural memory. All this well exemplifies the problems that emerge when something is part of a collective memory, but the sources which could serve as the basis for traditional historical analysis are missing. In these cases, novels, movies, memoirs, documentaries, in smaller part pictures, commenced to create and recreate over and over again the memory of historical facts in an ever-changing framework, pushing what used to be hot memory towards cold. The Hungarian government, together with other countries that were under German and Soviet occupation, canonized this narrative of double occupation, thus relegating all responsibility to the occupying forces. However, memory has multiple levels, and the local, regional, national, and transnational memories together create a multicolored patchwork. It is not easy to place the dark patches of the past into the ethnocentric memory politics, especially when there are competing remembrance. There is no narrative that could harmonize national historiography and the memories of various groups of survivors. Thus, political debates turn into debates about the past. In other words, instead of talking about their party programs, politicians debate various interpretations of history. This is, of course, suits the interests of the illiberal state, because in the meantime, it can dynamically develop its own new system of institution. The paradigm of double occupation equates the trauma of the Soviet occupation, that of the German occupation. However, all this embedded in a political process, therefore some memories stand a better chance of becoming more dominant than others. Not all shames are equal. So what to do with this? And now I'm getting to this new framework section. In the past years, political scientists and analysts, maybe I should go back to here. So in the past years, political scientists and analysts scrutinizing the impressive series of electoral victories of illiberal powers globally were forced to reconsider their conceptual tools when trying to understand the new phenomenon of what they call democratic authoritarianism, hybrid regimes, illiberal state, or mafia state. Together with the Polish sociologist Weronika Grzebalska, we compared Hungary and Poland, and based our findings, we argued that we are facing a new form of governance which stems from the failures of globalized neoliberal democracy, including its politics of emotion. Based on its modus operandi, we call this regime an illiberal polypore state, because as a parasite, it feeds on the vital resources of the previous political systems, and at the same time, actively contributes to its decay by setting up parallel institutions and redirecting resources into them. So there is nothing new here. There are no new ideas. The polypore state, by controlling hegemonic forms of remembrance, works within the framework of what is referred to as mnemonic security. The translation of history and its applications and thus their identity shaping effects are becoming a geopolitical factor. This is especially true about the memory of the Second World War. Polypore state set up lavishly funded historical films, new historical institutes, museums that have no professional quality assurance, and decreased the state funding of the pre-existent internationally recognized institutions. And memory politics plays a key role in this process. And I have to stop now and just read this very important policy paper, which is actually offering a way out to question the hegemony of illiberal institutions if there are possibility to get funding for institutions, bottom-up institutions. So going back to the paper. Different states are silencing stories about their own techniques of discrimination that were inherent parts of their history in order to prove that they were victims. The memory politics of the polypore state is to duplicate, depoliticize, and empty the narrative and historical agency by appropriating its meanings. In this historical context, it attributes to new meanings of victimhood and anti-communism. It also takes over and empties the concept of shame. This illiberal memory politics functions within the framework of new emotional economies where the concept of shame plays a new role. The sooner we recognize there has been an intervention in and by shame culture, the earlier the change may happen. The floating gap should float with active intervention of feminist scholars and activists as unashamed citizens. If we stick to Vanzina's metaphor, the floating gap always includes different experiences and it is always floating towards something else. So that at least is a hopeful sign for the future. So let me give you some more about these hopeful signs, an experience where I have the honor to be a part of. The counter strategy. Consequently, one might assume that wartime rape, especially in the context of the Second World War, has found its representation, manifesting women's sacrifice role by using romantic visual language dating back to the ancient traditions. Still, the monumentalization hasn't happened for a long time in Europe. It was not until 2013 that the artist and the sculptor Jerzy Bogdan Szumczyk broke this public silence with the Polish guerrilla monument in Gdansk. Without permission, he erected his monument Kom Frau, in which a Soviet soldier is depicted raping a pregnant woman at a gunpoint. The sculpture, with its German title, suggested that Soviet soldiers collectively punished Germans and Poles, and that rape was motivated by revenge. The artist was arrested briefly by the authorities, and the monument was removed very soon, and due to the absence of any official permits. This monument was conceptualized as a narrative monument. The statue tells what happened to women based on the stories of the survivors. However, more recently, 2 permanent monuments were completed in Hungary. At first glance, the observer doesn't exactly know what these monuments stand for. They reach back to the traditional, mythically pathetic storytelling, where the visitor of the monument needs to know the framework and the vocabulary to read the story in the artwork. The monument itself, without this context, says nothing specific to the viewer about wartime rape. The first monument in Csongrád, on a bronze plaque, a naked young woman with a springy, youthful body and long hair tries to cover herself with a shroud, clasping her hands in front of her well-formed breasts, while threatening hands reach out to her. And the text is, God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. A quote from the book of Revelation is engraved on the plaque. This coded inscription, using non-explicit language, made it at all possible to erect a plaque in the present political context. The relative invisibility is also due to the fact that only the local press reported about the unveiling of the plaque. Perhaps this saved the monument from the expected political battles. As the Orban government is getting closer to Putin's Russia, any reference to the crimes committed by the Red Army soldiers, as I mentioned, would have had immediate consequences. This memorial is similar to the visual narrative to the memorials to the Filipino women held captive by the occupying Japanese forces as sex slaves in the Second World War, erected in December 2017 on the initiative of local NGOs in the Philippines. This bronze statue depicts a blindfolded woman with a flag, slightly flaved dress, clasping her hands in front of her chest as a sign of suffering. In April 2018, the monument was removed because, according to the local officials, the exchange of pipes had to be carried out in that very area very soon. Women's organizations protested in vain. During a visit to Manila in January, the Japanese Minister of Interior made it crystal clear that economic ties between the two countries could not be strengthened while this monument was in place. A couple of months before, President Duterte had stated that he would not ignore the will of the NGOs who initiated the erection of the monument. But by April, however, the opinion has changed and the sculpture had been removed indefinitely. Not so the memorial plaque of Chongrad, which is still in place. This is the next one. The monument of women, the victims, were initiated and financed by Joseph Botos, made by a male sculptor, inaugurated by a male mayor, and the male journalists reporting about the events mentioned that the only woman who spoke at the inauguration said, I quote her, "With this monument, we bow our heads before the women and the general human dignity. Their sacrifice was sacred." And this initiator was Katalin Botos, the minister without portfolio of the first government between 1990 and 1994, after the collapse of communism. The monument did not say why the women's sacrifice would have been sacred and who were the perpetrators, but probably this unspecificity is the price they paid for its erection and not to be removed because of some pipes got wrong. There was another monument which was also erected like a pathetic romantic monument by the Zonnevent family in Buchu in 2019 with the inscription, you can read the inscription on the slide. Again, this has got nothing to do with the, it's not really explicit. The simple gray marble slab is applied to the side of the local Catholic Church. Only from the inaugural speeches reported by the press, we know that the sponsor of the monument, who had been only 11 in 1945, erected it in order to commemorate the, I quote him, "the humiliated girls and women whose attics were swept empty, who were robbed, who were incessantly harassed, who were tortured, who were labeled as gulags," end quote. So this is basically about the visual representation. So what kind of visual representation is possible? Do we need a monument? Is it possible to talk about a historical mass crime or to erect a monument for its victims if there is no visual documentation? After all, the few photos remaining from the Second World War, which depict dead female bodies, can only be assumed to depict victims of rape. Those who survived rarely gave testimonies, and these testimonies were not filmed or photographed. So the first answer to this question is that maybe such a monument is not at all desirable. This is Susan Sontag's reasoning, who argues that looking at a picture or a statue depicting violence recreates a visual culture of violence. This is one of the arguments for not erecting a monument at all. The other assertion is that most recent public statues and monuments erected in Hungary without public consultation or professional jury have rightly stirred up serious debate by defining one-sided concept of memory politics. Moreover, there was no social dialogue, lacking transparency or debate. Second, there is no historical narrative that would reconcile Hungarian national historiography in European context, including the memories of diverse groups of victims. Though it was mainly Soviet soldiers who committed mass rapes in Hungary, wartime sexual violence was not confined only to soldiers of the Red Army. The Hungarian soldiers, as allies of Nazi Germany, raped women in Ukraine or Yugoslavia, and occupying German troops committed crimes in Hungary. Remembering only the rapes committed by Red Army makes the phenomenon of rape, if committed by other armies, and the structural causes of wartime rape invisible. In this competition, women's memories always start at a disadvantage unless they are instrumental as symbols of national suffering. The lack of transnational memories and of willingness to remember women's suffering beyond national narratives leads to monuments like this in Bulcu or in Csongrád. The biblical quote refuses to address neither the memories nor the perpetrators directly. Nothing is said directly due to the lack of a usable, consensual, visual narrative, language, and vocabulary, because the language used in memorials in Hungary still follows the traditional heroization narrative. The third problem is due to the lack of public's active involvement in memory politics in Hungary. In general, memory operates at different levels, and these levels together create the diverse layers of the memory culture. However, it is a political process in which some groups and narratives and shames, I argued, exercise more power, especially with the support of the government. Today, many Hungarian NGOs are exploring the long overdue history of those citizens who were deported to the Soviet Union, that there are no women NGOs dealing with the war crimes rape history. The fourth problem is the memory of the Second World War recently again became a political battlefield. Second World War rape monuments are stirring up, I argued, political debates. The perpetrators are reluctant to admit responsibility, even if wartime rape acknowledged as a crime against humanity by now, and will do everything they can to prevent the monument from being erected. As the last soldiers who fought in the war are dying, this legalist option is fading away. This whole process of erecting this monument, the Russian media follows with keen interest the development. As the news about the planned monument was out, one of the Russian TV channels was already in my office recording an hour interview which has not been aired. The discussion of rape committed by the Hungarian occupying forces is invisible in comparison to the rapes committed by the Red Army. But it is especially the art projects in Kosovo that would like to mention here that reflect on an entirely different strategy of erecting monuments for women raped by occupying Serbian army. In 2015, a public sculpture was erected in Pristina entitled 2145, referring to the number of victims visualized by mosaic-like coins assembled to the form of a female face. The inscription dedicated to the monument to the multifaceted I quote from the monument, the multifaceted contribution and sacrifice made by all Albanian women during the Kosovo War of 1998-99 as a reminder of the cruel crime of rape committed by Serbian forces against nearly 20,000 women. End of quote. The second, more interesting and innovative temporary monument you see on this screen is Alkerta Havabripa's Thinking of You from 2015. The artist exhibited 5,000 clothes to try on 45 ropes in a football stadium, a structure that symbolizes hegemonic militarized masculinity. The clothes were collected from and by female victims and their family members from all over the country, which initiated a public engagement and fostered an intense debate. The message of this temporary monument is that what happened to the victims is not their fault. The first monument interprets war rape in an intentionalist framework. The Serbian army came and raped women to harm the Kosovar nation. And the second one, this one, is in a structuralist framework that is linking rape to militarism and masculinity. Let me conclude. No doubt that women were truly victims, the victims of male domination, militarism, and collapse of the Hungarian state, which was meant to protect its citizens. Yet the real question is how to depict this victimhood by respecting the women's suffering and at the same time to draw a lesson for today. It is also new as it hopes for a new artistic language. In the case of the Second World War, monuments of rape, both the insensitive iconographical simplicity of the Gdansk statue and the overly euphemistic emotionality and the idealization of the monument in Csongrád reaffirm women as victims. The Borcsú monument fits within the larger framework of the victims of communism. Maybe there will be a change in this visual narrative. A resolution was adopted by the General Assembly of the Budapest capital with majority of the opposition to the governing Fidesz party in January 2020 about the erection of the monument to women raped in war in 2022 with an international competition. This process will involve broad historical and artistic expertise and promises a transparent process involving public debate and discussion. The planned monument in Budapest is novel in several ways. First, because of its participative character. Following the example of this monument, thinking of you, what you see on the screen, in Kosovo, and the art project by Doris Salcedo, where victims of sexual violence during civil war in Colombia are making art pieces by fiercely hammering the metal plates from melted guns confiscated after the peace accord was signed. In this planned project in Budapest, only relieving the cross-generational trauma is possible, as it aims to connect the past experience with the concept of continuity of violence. The time has possibly come for a dialogue about innovative, inclusive, and public memorialization of the victims of sexual violence during wartime. The 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War is an excellent opportunity for artists to rethink this process of memorialization creatively and how to use an innovative visual language which still respects the dignity of the victims. Another novel element of the project is that artists will be given the opportunity in an open call to think, create, exhibit their work in a transparent and professional way. I have to say this is something new in Hungary. That development is to be cherished in a present illiberal cultural politics of the Hungarian state. As a return, politicians and inhabitants of Budapest expect nothing less than a really innovative art piece. Thank you. This is what I wanted to share with you, and I'm really grateful for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I am just one person applauding, but please imagine that everyone who's just with the name on the screen is doing the same. I want to thank you for this thought-provoking and incredibly suitable presentation, suitable for today, but also for our project. We have not so much time left, and there are quite some questions. So I take the liberty as the virtual host of today to ask the first question. And that's a little bit egoistic also, because I think of the history of this house for which I work, which is an ambiguous history as well. a kind of heroic one. People have survived in hiding during the war, but also a very painful one with sexual violence involved a little bit later. So there's this ambiguity that needs to be represented. And you mentioned the new artistic language that we should open a dialogue about. But more on a human level, concerning the state, you mentioned the mnemotic security. And I know that from myself. I want to know what I've got in front of me. Is that good or bad? Is it black or white? I want that security. How can we address something that is complex and insecure in the light of our need for something unambiguous?
Thank you very much. This is a very important question because obviously it's pretty easy to make those monuments and those concepts popular and understandable, where you are actually recognizing yourself and your kind of cultural repertoire and interesting toolkit. So that's why ambiguity is a very important tool, and also the ambiguity to appreciate and to accept the ambiguity. So I started this talk with this concept of unashamed citizens, but this being unashamed should be also the liberty to be open for other ideas. And to be unashamed, you have to be also basically ignoring previous cultural repertoires and previous discussions and come up with something new. Of course, I'm not an artist myself, but this particular case, which is the redefinition of the narrative about sexual violence during wartime, I think it's a great opportunity for artists to think. And I mean, I'm a historian. What I can do is work in the advisory committee. I mean, that's what I'm doing as a kind of a voluntary activity, but and creating space for others to do their work. And I think that's all what we can do. And on the web page of this project, we are collecting information and everything about the previous research. So I understand your point, Lars, and this is really kind of on the one hand naive that the artist will come in and will have totally original ideas. On the other hand, that's where I ended, that we don't expect anything else, then art will save us. But art can only save us if this art is basically a collective project. And that's why I really like this Kosovar project and also this Colombian project, because that also involves those who are a part of the kind of memory community. Thank you.
By the way, I was privileged enough within the SPEME project to see Doris Salcedo and walk on the metal that the women have hammered. It's really stunning, and I get goosebumps telling about it. It's really something. The next question, I would like to ask Marie Heller from Budapest, from your city, Andrea, from the Living Memorial, to take the floor.
Thank you, Lars, and thank you, Andrea, for this very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. I am rather worried about the escalating warrior and militant propaganda of the Orban government. So I think that it would be a good way of fighting it back by giving more voice to these suffering stories of women, whether they were raped by Russians or whoever. I mean, I'm thinking of all the women in different wars, because most of the time they are the real victims. So the question is how this can be shown more into the public. And I understand that your answer is art, and I'm ready to accept it, but still I think, and especially that I'm coming from a civil organization which organizes public debate, so I think that telling stories and the narratives of suffering would be very important. And I know that it is very difficult to make these people speak. And I also saw Fružina Skrapsky's film, and I think that it is a really senseless and brutish film. But still, it is very difficult to give voice to these people, because most of the time they are hiding from the public space. So how do you have any idea how these narratives can be put into public?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marie. And I don't know if all the others are who are joining this 58 people know that this Living Memorial is doing a very important and very brave work in Budapest, creating this counter memorial to these victims of German occupation I was talking about in the
Join us tomorrow at 2 to learn more about it.
Yeah. So to answer to this question, I have got two lines of argumentation. One is towards the general militarization, and this is not only the Orban government, there is this general remilitarization, which is the result of the collapse of the cardboard neoliberal state, which basically sucked all the resources and energy from the different institutions, health system, educational system, and now in the crisis, this cardboard is collapsing. And then what remained is the military, which actually jumps in, not only in Hungary, but in Poland and also in the US. You can, if you read the Biden's program, they are actually suggesting that the military would be doing the testing in the US. So the military jumps in, and this is nothing specific for Hungary. This is the zeitgeist, I would say. And this is really a feminist question and a kind of humanist question. How can you counteract this wave of militarization when you don't have structures? And that's why this project, for example, is very important, because it makes the kind of civic resilience visible as an alternative. The other line of argumentation I would go is about what to do with the stories. And on the one hand, I truly sympathize with your argument that you want to hear those stories, right? And but in my paper, I was not saying either stories or art, but I was saying that art has got only the capacity to come up with new forms of narratives. The stories, and this might sound horrible, but I'm saying is slightly repetitive, and these stories are basically the similar stories. And but this project also collects stories. So those artists who are hopefully trying to put their hands, throw their hats into this competition, they might also find lots of stories and family remembrance and objects which the Budapest Municipal Archive collects. So I'm not saying that art or stories, I'm saying that art informed by stories, but what I'm hoping is that art will actually produce something, a very different sensory kind of impact, as Lars was mentioning, that because he felt goosebumps when he saw the Salcedo art piece. I mean, whatever I'm doing, you know, I can only produce historical texts, right? So nobody will get goosebumps reading my text, no matter that I think I'm writing well, right? So this is a very different, and that's why I was speaking about shame and emotions, that this kind of emotional economy can be reverted and can be changed. And thank you very much for this question, and I hope I could answer that.
Yeah,
thank you very much. We've got 5 more questions, and I'm afraid that I have to ask now already to all of those who will put a question to be short and concise, and also to Andrea to answer short and concisely, just because of time, not because of content. Jasper Chalcraft is one of our partners. He represents the European University Institute in Florence, and the floor is yours, Jasper.
Okay, thank you. And thank you so much, Andrea. I found that incredibly stimulating, and it did give me goosebumps, your talk. So
thank you.
You mentioned a lack of transnational representation as, in a way, part of the problem. And I wanted to just think a little bit here for you to talk more perhaps about how the transnational may be a key way to move things forward. Of course, Michael Rothberg has talked convincingly about transnational memory being important in, the Holocaust, for example, for anti-colonial struggles in Algeria and elsewhere. Another place where sexual violence against women has been an extraordinary part of that historical story. And I'm going to ignore Lars just for 1 second and add in one tiny bit, sorry, Lars, which is it's the sexual violence of a slavery state, because this is not just a colonial story, it's a deeper one. So Brazil, there's a new study out showing that the mitochondrial DNA, the maternal DNA of the Brazilian population is 36% African, 34% Amerindian, but the Y chromosome, the male DNA, is 75% white. So we have in the DNA of the Brazilian population this incredible demonstration of sexual violence through the slavery history and the colonization history of a country. And this ties, would tie in very well, I think, with the colonial struggles of North African states colonized by the British, the French, and others. So I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about whether these working with the colonial memories of sexual violence can help more broadly, perhaps, with questions in Eastern Europe to do with sexual violence from the Red Army and so on.
Right. Thank you very much. I think this is a really important way of rethinking the whole issue of sexual violence, to bringing in this kind of decolonizing aspect. And no matter that how much I appreciate Michael Rothberg's work, I think that this transnational memory concept is very problematic, because it ignores the power relations. It really ignores the power relations, and ignores what you were actually asking, which is the issue of decolonization. So I just can give you one example. If you look at the memory of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, you see that most of the concepts, ideas, and films which were used in order to articulate memory in Eastern Europe are coming from the US. Right? So this is a part of the kind of neoliberalization of and the Americanization of Holocaust memory, which has been written about a lot, but this is also a part of the colonization in a sense. And also the issue of the Soviet soldiers, and ignoring that the Soviet Union was an imperial country, in a sense that it was a multi-ethnic, multinational kind of conglomerate. And discussing that is also something which might help us to get a kind of deeper understanding of these kind of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Next, I would like to ask Cristina Modreanu from Romania, representing Timișoara Cultural Capital 2023 it is now, and working with theater as resistance.
Thank you, Lars, and mostly thank you, Andrea, for a great lecture. You certainly gave us all food for thought, and we've been thinking a lot. All the partners in this project, we have been thinking about these ideas, and I think it's very important that you add to this conversation some layers that maybe we didn't touch so much. Well, in a way, you answered my question, which was about the artist. How can artists be effective in this process of rewriting the history in a more inclusive way, using shame and memory as creative tools? And your answer was emotion. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, not only emotions. I mean, let's take this extremely problematic statue of the Komfrau, right? This Gdansk monument, which is problematic from the beginning till the end, right? Starting from the guerrilla statue, from the iconography, from the title. I mean, the whole thing is very problematic. On the other hand, it brought up a discussion which has not been present in Poland, and initiated a very important research, historical research, which actually produced interesting books. So, I mean, I'm not, looking at art as, there is the, art piece, here is the Michelangelo David, and then, everything is basically solved because we have got the art piece. But I'm thinking about art as not only giving a language of discussing it, but also opening up space for dialogue between the different societal actors, and especially creating a space for a kind of community engagement and also talking to the different stakeholders. So that's why I really pin a hope to this project of the Budapest Municipio, because they are not only having a lecture series, but also collecting memoirs, also international conferences, exhibitions, and then start announcing the call for art pieces. So hoping that the artists will participate in this whole process and not just, pop up from the moon and they are just, creating an art piece. So art as a form of communication. And I think Michael Rothberg's recent book about art and memory is really interesting and helps to understand these processes immensely. Thank you.
So it's not only emotion, it's also participation, right?
Yeah, but also participation, and also the whole space. It basically creates a space. It's a space where several discussions can happen, and also this will be in a public space. So, and public space has got layers of memory. So, who are visiting, who are going there, discussing, and I would love to see those discussions around the certain art pieces, how they are going.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Joachim Umlauf now, director of the Goethe Institute in Bucharest, also partner in our project, long-standing collaborator. Joachim, please.
Yeah, as the other said, thanks a lot for this inspiring lecture. I have a question and a remark. Maybe this remark is, I don't know, we see. First of all, when we talk about violence, why don't we talk about violence against children and only women? But this is also only, I don't know, a question I just thought at during your conference. The second one would be, because we had this project in the framework of European programs. So, and we continue with these programs. And the really, how to say, the real practical question would be, does the European Union establish enough programs to help us, the Europeans, to deal with these questions? We have Creative Europe, we have Erasmus, we have many kinds of projects, but wouldn't it be good to have a special program or special programs dealing with these questions of memory?
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think this is, asking about children and children victims is really important, but you can also ask questions about the men and the men who were raped in military conflicts. And I interviewed several, not only women, but men who were raped by female Soviet soldiers during the Second World War. So this is basically about the structural element of violence and militarized violence. And the sexual violence has got this function of not only as a weapon of war, but it's also something which is creating kind of comradeship in the army, saying that the soldiers are taught to be killers, because it's very difficult to teach people to kill. And through this particular act, the soldiers are learning and to enjoy the power. And this has been described by several anthropologists and also Cynthia Enloe in her path-breaking book. But I think that when we are talking about women as victims of militarized rape, we are talking about this structural element. And that also includes other victim groups. So this is not a competition of different victim groups, but it's basically the understanding of different structural elements and also the impact of militarized masculinity. And as far as the European Union funding is concerned, of course, you are right that it would be nice to have more funding about a real European dialogue, but especially between the old Europe and the new Europe, because this new Europe often feels that not very much heard and its cultural heritage not appreciated. And because of the victim of this double occupation, that kind of double victimhood I was talking about actually offers space for a kind of Sonderweg, a kind of, and that is the cradle for all these populist discourse and the illiberal forces and the anti-Brusselite discourse, which is so strong nowadays. So I think you are right with this question. We can only fight these illiberal forces with dialogue and with dialogue about culture and about our memories. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this clarification.
Thank you.
Now I would like to ask Anya Tsukmantel, director of the Etz Chaim synagogue in Hania in Crete, Greece, in the very south.
Yes, at the very brim of Europe. Yes, well, I want to join my project partners in thanking for this very interesting and very fitting presentation for tonight. To some extent, also my question has been answered or at least addressed. I'm interested in the engagement of audiences. Again, so I'm asking as a practitioner from Greece, where we're not necessarily dealing with an illiterate state, but surely, of course, with an exclusive society with a strong mainstream that leaves little room for alternative narratives. And we've dealt with this also in our project here locally on Crete. And I was wondering, and you did touch on it in the presentation, how we can deconstruct the mainstream narratives, be they illiberal or exclusive, and present this reconstruction to audience who themselves hold such mainstream views, but without causing immediate rejection. We're in this kind of polarized society. So I kind of probably asking, for the solution to one of the biggest challenges we're facing so far. But I was wondering how we could rather engage audiences in the process and making the process visible to audience, and maybe make this a tool of, engaging more people and find more interest in a broader audience.
Thank you very much. This is really the $1 million question. And as a gender studies scholar, what I can tell you what I am doing, right? I cannot tell you what others should be doing, but what I'm doing when I'm working on this really very contested field of Holocaust studies, Jewish studies, gender studies, and the Second World War. So my strategy is that I'm writing about issues which are important for everybody, and those who are and stories which are actually giving interesting narratives. So my strategy is not to be reactive. I rather be proactive and even unorthodoxly insisting on that what I find important, and trying to do it in a kind of accessible language and in a way that lots of people find this interesting. And in the long run, this works, I have to say. So I can give you just one example, that this article, what we wrote with Veronika Grzebelska about the polypore state, which I think is a really interesting kind of theoretical tool to talk about this very specific phenomenon. We wrote this up for a peer-reviewed journal, which was read by 283 people. And we also wrote it up for the Huffington Post, and it was read by more than 300,000 people. This is exactly the same thing. And this whole concept of the polypore is very much debated. And, I hope that, somebody will ask the question that I can, explain why such a biologizing metaphor is useful. And hopefully there are no Trotskyists in the audience who would also, question that, why do you use this term? Because, every state is a kind of parasite. So, I mean, I think I know most of these arguments, but this is a very contested term, right? And still, when we wrote this up in an accessible language for a wider audience, it was read by lots of people. And, some of them accepted, some of them say, oh, that's stupid, but at least they started to think along the lines we thought it's important. So my suggestion would be that be stubborn, stick to your values, and make sure that you are actually speaking in a language which is not full of this kind of academic and blah blah lingo, but something which is somehow coming from the audience. So that I found interesting, which is very difficult because we are all socialized in this horribly complicated language, academic language. But at this point, when there is a populist attack on science, I think this is a very useful tool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrea and Anja. Then the last question is by Natalie Jorgatze from Culture Action Europe. Unless also your question may be answered already, but then you can give it a twist. But I'm glad that Culture Action Europe has a voice in the end of the evening.
Thank you very much, Lars. Thank you very much, Andrea, for a great, very, very interesting lecture and a great end of the day. Many questions have been coming to my head. Many of them have been answered. But what I wanted to maybe as a final question to put is the following: we are here, and your lecture is here as part of the contested heritage week that we are running, and we are having contested heritage at the very heart also of the European, of the shared European history. I was wondering if you would have had some recommendations or ideas, what kind of policy proposals can be put forward towards the European decision makers to create the space, to act also as a catalyst. And I'm representing here also the cultural sector, cultural and political sector, how we can create this political space, but also propose the very clear policy proposals and recommendations to the European decision makers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm honored to answer to this question. I have got basically two directions. Besides, I haven't read this policy paper what Lars and the project is doing, but I think that would be
it'll be in your mail tonight.
Yeah, it will be nice to read that. But I have got two answers. One is related to this polypore state. So this polypore state, the illiberal polypore state, is actually creating different gongos, government-sponsored NGOs. And what I see is that the European Commission and the different European officials have got a really serious problem of differentiating between an NGO and the gongo. Because the gongos, these government-sponsored NGOs, they look like an NGO, they are registered as an NGO, but they are not NGOs, but they are basically transmission organizations of the government propaganda. And this, this causes a problem and confusion because I see that the European Commission is funding these gongos lavishly, while the different NGOs are basically struggling because they are not getting any funding. And that goes to my second proposal, which is based on the necessity that the European Commission and the institutions, European institutions, recognize the real face of this polypore state and how it actually operates. It operates with parallel institutions, it operates via hate, and it operates via securitization. And this polypore state captured the different state institutions. Therefore, the whole European Commission, which is basically channeling the funding and all the communications via state, is basically doomed. So unless the European Commission is finding alternative ways to communicate directly to different regions, cities, or different other organizations, then the funding, the European taxpayers' money, Lars, your money, the money of the others, will be actually ending up in the pockets of these oligarchs who are enriching themselves and in the gongos, which are basically implementing the government's ideological agenda. And, on the one hand, it's easy not to take into consideration that this is a very specific new form of state. On the other hand, if the European Commission is not taking this into consideration, then itself, the Europe as a project will be eaten up by the polypore. And we see already some tendencies and steps towards that. And the European project as such will be emptied in the long run. So the risk is high and the stakes are also high. Thank you. And I wish you all possible luck to this. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I think those were brilliant last words, and I take them also as a call to action. But I must say that in the cultural field and in the artistic field and in the NGO and activist field that is represented in this project, we are kind of constantly under arms, so to speak. But this last plea I also read a little bit as a kind of encouragement to be more subversive in using the tools that we have at hand to really find these new channels of communication, to get to those parts of Europe and to those Europeans to which we don't get because they are filtered away by everything we've heard today. Thanks very much, Andrea, for this. I think this evening also gave us the meat on the bones for this week. We really got content. We got down to the substance matter of contested heritage and why it is important to talk about it. It will be nice for all of us tomorrow in the session about the toolkit when it's very practical, and in the second session about with the policymaker when we talk about what needs to change in funding structures, for instance, to know why we talk about it, because you have taken us by our hands and shown us where we need to look and where the potential for the need for dialogue is, and what we can have to make out of it, because it's so urgent and it's 12 o'clock already. So I thank everyone that participated through YouTube, through Facebook, through Zoom. I apologize for running a little bit over time. This session has been recorded, and as of tonight will be available on YouTube also, and we'll share it on our website so that people who you want to also point on it can still see it. Andrea, I hope you will follow the project further. We'll stay in touch. I wish you good night, and all the participants as well. Have a nice evening and see you soon, I hope.
Thank you very much. Good luck with your job. Thank you.